this is in preparation, obviously, for next week when we celebrate Hanukkah. And my inspiration for this is a bit of First Fruits of Zion. I don't know if you guys can see it. I'll bring it up close. There's a little how to Hanukkah kind of guide. It's got a lot in there, some historical, biblical studies, how to light the candles, a bit of halakha, all that kind of stuff. It's quite good. It's just a condensed little guide, but it's quite packed full of information. So that was a bit of inspiration. Also, the study we've been doing in Revelation, I realize there are many parallels because what we're about to see is end time, what's the right word? Apocalyptic, or not epileptic, apocalyptic studies or cycles or eschatology. There we go. Eschatological patterns are going to be played out. So if we're in good stead with Hanukkah, we're in good stead for Revelation. Yeah, the end is nigh kind of stuff. All right, so this I've entitled The Flames of Rebellion, the Light of Unity. So during our studying the book of Revelation, we looked at the beast in Jewish history and through a Jewish lens. So how it would look like to a second century Jewish audience, or Gentiles grafted in as well, but taking on that Jewish lens and historical lifestyle. So it clarified much of the sensationalism. Like we all have a much more in-depth idea and we have a less crazy idea. It all kind of makes sense now. We can get our ducks lined up a little bit better because we've got this tool for viewing it. So we're going to imply a similar understanding of the first and second chapters of Revelation, which will link to the book of Daniel, which links to the story of the Maccabees, which links to other chapters in Revelation, all right? So during our study, we saw, well, we will see, but if we remember reading in the first chapters, we saw that there was a menorah, and it's the image of the Messianic communities, and that's Revelation chapters 1 and 2. So we need to use the same method of asking, why use a Jewish symbol like a menorah? Like what's the point, right? What significance is a menorah to a Greek person? You know, well, it's not very significant at all. So then we have to ask the question, or we can answer the question, that's because the audience is Jewish. If you, there's a really brilliant historian who works and associates with Yeshiva Shuvu, and he has done exponential amounts of research with photo evidence. He's gone into tombs and he said, here's a centurion and here's a menorah. So there's a Greco centurion buried in a tomb with a menorah next to it. And either he said, please bury me. Let's say this guy's name was Cornelius. It's not, but it's the same pattern. There's a picture of him as a centurion and next to it, there's a menorah on the doorpost of the tomb. And his community has said, this Roman centurion is so Jewish, we're going to bury him with a menorah because he belongs to this community. That's the significance of the menorah, right? It's a very Jewish symbol. And it's not just like a eat ham on Passover Jewish symbol. It's like I am right in there with the Chabad, with the Haradim, with the Hasidim, like right in the thick of my Jewish life, being as observant as I can to bring Messiah. That's when you think of menorah, that's the guys you should think about, or the community that we are expected to see. So let's quickly go to Revelation 1. In its chapters 1:12. I turned around to see the one who was speaking, and when I heard, I saw the 7 gold menorahs. And among the menorahs was one like the Son of Man, wearing a robe down to his feet and a gold band around his waist. So we see that that's an image, and then it tells us in, where are we? Chapter 1:20. Here is the secret of the 7 stars you saw in the right hand, and the 7 gold menorahs. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 Messianic communities, and the 7 menorahs are the 7 Messianic communities. So it's a symbol for a Messianic community. But then we've asked the question, what is it? Or why use it? It's a Jewish symbol, but why is it a Jewish symbol? What do Jewish people think of, and what does it represent based on the Torah? So we have to go back to the Tanakh to look at that. All right. So the place that we're going to go to first is Exodus 27, 20 to 21. So it starts the Parsha Tetzaveh, and it says this: "You shall further instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling the lamps regularly. Aaron and his sons shall set them up in the tent of meeting, outside the curtain which is over the ark of the pact, to burn from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a dew from the Israelites for all time, throughout the ages." So this tells us the menorah a bit more in depth, its use and its purpose and its symbolism. So Exodus 27 tells us the menorah is meant to be a light, okay? Pretty cool. That's a light in the temple, that makes sense. So lights give off light, okay? Cool. But it definitely has more significance to that. We have to ask then the question, if God is a God who creates light and he is light, why is there a lampstand in the tabernacle, in the Beit Midrash? He is light. He says that there be light and he creates light. So what's the point? Well, we're going to look more at that as well. So yeah, we need to ask the question, what is significant about God requesting us to build light for him, who is the God of light? So I would say the menorah is part of a priestly duty. Now, when I say priestly, it's including the smaller and larger priesthoods. So it's got the Kohanim, who actually serve in the temple, as in guard and serve in the inner boundaries, and the nation of priests, Kal Israel, all of Israel, who are said to be a nation of priests, servants of God, and a light to the nations. Okay, so now we're getting a bit of a better picture. Okay, so then let's break down some of the other elements we see in Exodus 27 here. So we see that olives had to be produced to make the oil. So the children of Israel had to go out, plant olive vineyards or buy olives because they were in the desert at this time, take those olives, crush those olives, produce oil, and give the oil for the lighting of the menorah. That is quite significant itself. So what we're beginning to see here is a communal effort, right? So it starts out with the people have a work to do, they hand it over to the priest, and the priests have a work to do with that oil, with the product produced by the children of Israel. So we're already beginning to see a communal expression coming to life here, which is awesome. Numbers 8:1 tells us to light the menorah in front of the lamps. So the lamps face towards the curtain. So it lights up the inner place where God dwells, which is also significant. Again, going back to the question, why does God need us to have a light facing him? Why light up anything at all, particularly inwards towards where he dwells? Like, what's the point? Well, I would say these elements are symbolic of our service to God as a community. This is what the menorah represents to the Jewish people. It's our service to God collectively. So everyone plays a role, from non-priest to high priest, because the high priest was the only one who could light the menorah. So the olives represent our attributes. So they're the attributes that we need to produce, as in good fruit. So patience, kindness, kind of like the 3 Ps that can be woven in here. So it's those fruits of the Spirit as well. It's our mitzvah. It's our musar. It's all of the above. It's our hard work or toil in the Torah. So these good fruits, we produce them, and then they're tested, they're crushed. So we work to be patient, reach a level of patience, and God applies pressure to it. And the good that comes out of our patience is the oil. That's one kind of metaphor for it. It could also be keeping Shabbat every night when you work a hectic work roster, when you have issues at home, when you're sick, when you've got this, when you've got that, and you've got any number of excuses. So it's always good to remember that is also crushing, that is also producing oil that is a light, or can be used by God. It's a very important service that we do there. It's loving our neighbor, it's fighting the evil inclination, it's getting up to say Shema Israel in the wee hours of the morning as best we can, even though in winter it's harder, and some it's not too bad. You get up at the crack of dawn anyway. Well, I do. But there's more to it. When we do these works, we produce the good fruit to make the oil from, which lights up the menorah, the inner place of God's house. The light, though, is also representative of God's Torah. Proverbs 6:23 the Torah is a lamp unto my feet. So we probably all know this, but we've heard that the Torah is often translated as law or whatever, but it's an acronym, Torah. It's light. It's a light unto our feet. So as we live it out, as we action it, it becomes an illumination to which path we should walk on. So another important element, and not just that, it becomes a light to those around us. So it sheds light on what other people, even just by our actions, by being a light, people can see where we're going and say, how can I get on that path? We don't always have to say a whole lot. We just have to do something, and people will see the way to go. So yeah, so we're trying to avoid the Greco mistranslation of just law when it means light. So the menorah represents our communal work to throw light on God's character and reveal him in this world through our works in Torah. So it's not just, like I said, a light to our feet, but to others. And then when people look at God, they see our community illuminating the characteristics of Hashem. That's why it's meant to be in the inner place towards where God physically dwells in the house that he built for us, right? We, this community of living stones, forms a living temple whose good works and attributes light up God for people who can't see him. And they say, where is God in our day and age? They need look no further than us, in theory. So it's a bit harder than that, but that's the idea. So even more so, the Torah says that when Aaron lights the menorah, he ascends. This is in Parsha Behelotecha, which is in Numbers. I think I didn't put the scripture there. Oh, I got it up there, Numbers 8:1. Okay, so it says, when you ascend, so it says Behelotecha, literally when you ascend. It could mean when you ascend the lights, when you kindle the lamps, but when we see the root word there, it's an aliyah, as in when you make an aliyah for Torah, or when you set up a burnt offering. The Hebrew doesn't call it a burnt offering, it calls it an ascension offering, because the fragrance arises to God, or you elevate towards God as you come close to him. So literally, we can say that Aharon ascends. He has to ascend spiritually to light the menorah, even though we know it's on a physical level, he has to get up to reach the candelabra. But we could also say that our works ascend each other, or our community has to ascend to a level of moral and ethical purity and able to even touch the menorah. We have to get up to a different level of being. Hence God saying, build for me a house of purity in your world. So there's many significant factors there. So this is why the menorah is a communal Jewish symbol. It encapsulates the individual Jew, the different levels of sanctity from the nation of priests to the tribe of priests. But the menorah cannot function without the whole community. Without the whole community, God's house will have no light. So that's a really important foundation to lay for chapters 1 through to the end of the whole book of Revelation. So could you imagine the high priest one day goes in and there's no olive oil because no one has got any fruits to produce the oil needed to light the menorah, and God says, have it lit evening to morning. It's a tamid, it's forever. You can't just light it Monday, not Tuesday, or light it Monday and light it Shabbat. You can't do that. It has to be every day lit, and it has to be cleaned out and maintained continually. Okay, so now we've got a picture of why a menorah is a Jewish symbol for community and how we should start to think about it in ourselves. Let's look at the Maccabees at the end times together. So the background to the Hanukkah story is in the middle of the reign of the beasts of the book of Daniel. So the Hanukkah story takes place during the start of the end times period mentioned in the book of Daniel, which corresponds to the book of Revelation. So we know that the Babylonian Empire is the head of gold of the image from the book of Daniel. And the Roman emperors were the horns and the beasts, which represent the Greco-Roman empires, the progression of all these horrible, worldly, adulterous leaders that would force people in the known world to bow down to them or die, particularly the Jewish people. So let's look at Revelation 13:5-9 quickly. Okay, 13:5-9 says this. I'll start with 4. They worshipped the dragon because he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who can fight against it? It was given a mouth to speak arrogant blasphemies. It was given authority to act for 42 months. So it opened its mouth in blasphemies against God to insult his name, his Shekinah, and those living in heaven. And it was allowed to make war on God's holy people and to defeat them. It was given authority to every tribe, people, language, and nation. Everything living on earth will worship it except those whose names are written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb, slaughtered before the foundation of the world. Those who have ears, let them hear. So that is the backdrop to this story, which we also saw. Those are the beasts of Daniel that we're talking about here. But, I mean, this is, you have to remember back to our previous studies, but I'm sure it's not that much of a stretch. All right, and we're going to look at Matthew 24:15 a bit later, but there's something happening there again, so we're seeing patterns. So Daniel chapter 8 tells us of Antiochus, who performs the abomination of desolation, which we see happening again in Revelation 13:5-9. He is responsible for the desolation. He is responsible for the slaughter of Jewish people, the outlawing of the Torah of study, and contaminating the temple. Yeah. So the Maccabees were responsible for the rededication and purification of the temple. And the culmination of this is the miracle of the oil. So the holy menorah could shine for the whole 8 days. So just like the Messianic communities who need to remain faithful to the commandments and to keep the faith of Yeshua. So there's a quick overview, right? So we see Revelation's already talking about these beasts. But we're going to fill that in a little bit more because the period between the close of what is erroneously called the Old Testament and the New Testament is called, we call it in Yeshiva Shuvu and the class, the loudest silent years. They're called silent years because there's no one standing up directly saying, "Thus saith the Lord." But make no mistake, biblical things are happening on an extremely relevant level. So let's have a look. So Daniel's prophecies are linked to Revelation, the beasts, which we've studied. The Greco-Roman empires and the horns are the emperors. So in Daniel chapter 8, verses 1-3, we see the history of the Maccabees prophesied about. So there's that ram that it talks about. Let's quickly go to the book of Daniel. So in Daniel 1. Says this: in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel. After the one that had appeared to me earlier, I saw in the vision at that time, I was in the fortress of Shushan, in the province of Elam. I saw in the vision that I was beside the Ulai River, and I looked and saw a ram standing between me and the river. He had 2 horns. The horns were high, with one higher than the other, and the higher sprouting last. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward. No beast could withstand him, and there was no one to deliver from his power. He did as he pleased and grew great. And as I looked on, a he-goat came from the west, passing over the entire earth without touching the ground. The goat had a conspicuous horn on its forehead. He came up to the 2-horned ram that I had seen standing between me and the river and charged him with ferocious force. I saw him reach the ram and rage at him, and he struck the ram and broke its horns, and the ram was powerless to withstand him. He threw him to the ground and trampled him, and there was none to deliver the ram from his power. So we're talking about a crossover of empires, from Persian, from Greco to Roman. So this is the period we're slipping from Greek to Rome, from speaking Latin and Greek to Latin. So we've got this, as we saw in our study, that those 2 languages became the main languages, right? So this is what we're seeing in these loud silent years. So they're, actually quite loud. Right. So the goat is... Yeah, sorry, this is a Beit Midrash, yes. I thought you were going to interrupt this to say something. So I believe that the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire and the goat is the Greeks. It's this ram beast with its horn emperor which provides us with the end times template, which we need to identify to fully understand the prophetic significance of Hanukkah. So if we go back to Daniel chapter 8, 9-4, this horn represents the Antichrist character in this narrative. It's Antiochus Epiphanes. And during his reign, the study of Torah, as I said, was a capital offense. He stopped the sacrifices, defiled the temple, And let's look furthermore at Daniel 11:31 to 35. So it says, forces will be delivered by him. They will desecrate the temple, the fortress, and they will abolish the regular offering and set up appalling abomination. He will flatter with smooth words those who act wickedly towards a covenant. But the people devoted to their God will stand firm. The knowledge amongst the people will make the many understand. And for a while they shall fall by the sword and flame, suffer captivity and spoliation. In defeat they will receive a little help, and many will join them increasingly. Some of the knowledge will fall, that they may be refined and purged and whitened until the time of the end. For an interval shall remain until the appointed time. That's kind of linked back to what we've already read, right? We read that in Revelation just before. We'll read it again in a minute. So let's read. Sorry, I went back. We just read Daniel. Oops, I skipped ahead of myself here. So we just read Daniel 11:31 to 35. It's the same elements as Revelation 13:1 to 8. Let's quickly jump there. And I saw a beast come out of the sea with its 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 royal crowns, and its heads were blasphemous names. The beast which is of the beast appeared to have received a fatal wound, but its fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth followed after the beast in amazement. They worshipped the dragon because he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who can fight against it? It was giving. The pattern's just repeated, but the same beast, the same character, are going to do the same thing again. So you can imagine the Maccabees reading the scroll of Daniel and being like, oy vey, is this horn? Is this an antichrist? Is he an anti-Mashiach? And looking at the setting up a statue of Zeus and slaughtering a pig on the altar, they would have been like, absolutely. We're living in the end times. Even more so spelled out in detail than we are. And sometimes we think we're in the most end times, you know? It would have been in Technicolor for them, in 4K, as they say. So yes, question.
And I was going to say I think the problem is we go back to that image and think we're going to relive that, but it's not necessarily going to happen so, because the temple needs to be established, and
yes.
That image needs to be set up in the temple. So it's not going to be physically exactly the same as that. So
no.
We're going to experience something similar, but it's not exactly, and we're always looking for that exact image to occur, whereas the Maccabees actually saw the real thing.
That's Daniel right. They saw the first pass.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, you are waiting for me, Ryan.
Hang on. Sorry, speak again. You're a little bit quiet.
Can you give me a timeline, please? Because I'm kind of floundering a little bit.
That's okay. So the timeline is, so we're looking at the book of Daniel. So Daniel is in the Babylonian exile. So the Jewish people have been taken out of Israel, have been taken to the kingdom of Babylon, and he's received this vision in Babylon, written it all down, and taught it to his disciples. And then we've seen that him recognizing in this vision, the head of gold of this image that he sees in his prophecy is the king of Babylon. And he's like, the end times have started right now with me writing this, stroke of my pen kind of thing. I can imagine him saying, the end times are right here in my vision, I'm living it. And then we go through a few other emperors. That one conquers the Babylonians. I think it's Alexander the Great. Or there's a few great history leaders that come. And the Greeks, the last beast that comes, it talks about the ram being killed. Or the Greeks are the last one to come and crush them down, the last guy. And those...
after that, though.
And then the Romans come after that.
But you're talking about the Greek era.
Yeah, we're talking about the Greek era, which is when, you flick to the last page of your part of the Old Testament, That's the history that's happening during that, while you're reading that.
Yeah.
So Babylon has fallen, the Greeks have taken over, they've set up King Herod, kind of, his predecessors. We've got all these like fake Jewish kings that are a Greco-Roman application or appointment. And the Maccabees are the people living during that time.
So the time, what time is it? BC, something?
Maybe I can quickly flick in here. 160 BC.
160, 167, something like that, yeah.
So the second temple was standing.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Does that clarify it a bit, Lillian?
Yes, I just was wondering who this Antiochus something or other person, who he was.
He is the emperor of the Greco-Roman Empire. So if the beasts are empires and the horns are emperors, he is the ruler of that beast. So he's the ruler of the Greek Empire that was ruling the known world at the time.
Yeah, at around 160 BC.
That's right.
Yeah, before Common Era.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. All right, so we've seen the parallel between Revelation and Daniel 8. But we see a warning from Yeshua that this cycle, and a little bit like my dad said, while it has happened, it will happen again, maybe not the same way, but we are warned in Matthew 24:15. It says this, 24. In those days. Obviously, Yeshua knew the story of Hanukkah. He knew the temple was once desecrated, and he would have known the Maccabees, and he was there during that celebration. That's poignant. If it was irrelevant, they wouldn't have talked anything about the Feast of Dedication or Hanukkah and Yeshua being there. It was relevant to him, and it's relevant to us. So why is he saying when you see it again? Because a pattern will in some way or another, maybe not in the, well, I can't really say how it's going to happen, but we know when something of that caliber happens again, we are to be ready. Question at the back there.
I was going to say, I think it happened again in the Roman era anyway.
It probably did.
Oh, you were going to say that? Oh, sorry.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it did happen not long after Yeshua's time.
Just before they destroyed the temple, wasn't it? And they had to flee under the Romans, which is the next beast coming up that devoured them. Okay. So the Hanukkah story ends with the saints taking back the holy place. The Maccabees defeat their oppressors using guerrilla warfare versus like the trained Greek army. Judah the Maccabee rallies all these guys together. But the poignant thing is, the people that he rallies together are not soldiers, they're holy men. And I'm not advocating violence as a way of holiness. But in this extreme time, it wasn't just the average Joe. A lot of them, there was a group called the Hasidim, which are not the black hats and coat guys we get today, but they're inspired by them. They were called righteous, faithful. Faithful is a good way, and kind and faithful people. That's Hasid or Hasidim covers all those terms. Those people which then became the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, and the way of the Nazarenes, we should add. They were all inspired. They were like the progenitors of the Jewish branches that grew out in the time of Yeshua. So it used these very, very dedicated people to God's ways to fight this battle. It was a proper holy war. It was for God, for his holy place, to stop the eradication of the Torah and the people whose heritage is the Torah. So for them, it would have been a Holocaust. You can imagine now, well, like being in the concentration camps, the Jewish people saying it's just like the days of the Maccabees, you know. So that's how the story ends. They win by the grace of God. They only use a small force and they outwit the Greeks and they destroy them. But I just want to draw a parallel here. So if the people that composed this fighting force were holy men, then we should throw our minds back to the 144,000 who had to be pure according to the Torah. I think David was one of the first people to clue on. He said, hey, this is a fighting force. We now realize that to be a part of the fighting force of the end times, you have to have biblical purity. You know, it says not to be touched by a woman. We're not trying to point out women or make it a thing. It's about purity in general. You have to have the Torahs and the Jewish halakha of purity if you want to be the ones fighting against the beast of the end times. It's a really important parallel. Okay, so now we're going to look at, again, the menorah a bit more in depth and how it kind of ties these elements we've looked at together. So now in Revelation 1, 12 and 20, we see the menorah mentioned again. Oh, we've already done that. We've looked at it. So we identified that the lampstands or the menorahs were the Messianic communities. So it goes further in Revelation 2. I might have put the wrong verse here. Yeah, Revelation chapter 2 says this. So I'll read the whole thing till 6. Revelation 2, to the angel of the Messianic community in Ephesus, write, here is a message from the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 gold menorahs. I know what you have been doing, how hard you have worked, how you have persevered, and how you can't stand wicked people. So you tested those who call themselves emissaries but aren't, and you found them to be liars. You are persevering, and you have suffered for my sake without growing weary. But I have this against you. You have lost the love you had at first. Therefore, remember where you were before you fell, and turn from this sin, and do what you used to do before. Otherwise, I will come to you and remove your menorah from its place, if you do not turn from your sin. So Yeshua, the high priest, comes in to clean the lamps every now and again. And if the if the menorah is not made of pure gold, as it says in the construction of it, it says it's made of zahav tahor, pure gold, as in it's pure gold, but it can also mean, the same word can mean purity, ritual purity. The menorah has to be pure or it loses its purpose. It has to be a holy menorah, a sanctified menorah. So Yeshua warns us that this lack of repentance merits the removal of the menorah. So what happens then if our community loses its holiness, its sanctification, its separation in its ability to do light? We become like any other secular club or association. And not that those things are wrong, but there's no point bringing Yeshua into it if we're not sanctified. There's a hand up at the back.
Is this what some people call becoming lukewarm or cold?
I would say so.
The purity.
I would say it's very much similar.
It's not losing the Holy Spirit or the fire, as some people say. It's losing your love and passion for God, and also the purity that comes with that.
Yeah, that's right. You lose your purpose for why you're following God. It's like having a falling out in your marriage. You might still be married, but you're not really coming to your part of the marriage covenant that you said you were going to be a part of. So the menorah, as we said, is made up of pure gold and highlights the purity. We find that in the 2nd chapter of Revelation, verse 14, it says this. Speaking to the Messianic community in Pergamum, I'll read from 12. To the angel of the Messianic community in Pergamum, write, here is a message from the one who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you are living and where the adversary's throne is, yet you are holding on to my name. You did not deny trusting me even at the time when my faithful witness, Antipas, was put to death in your own town, there where the adversary lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. You have some people who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to set a trap for the people of Israel. They would eat food that had been sacrificed to idols and commit sexual sins. People who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Turn from these sins, otherwise I'll come to you and very soon make war against them with the sword of my mouth, or the Torah. That's what the Acts Council told us, not just the Jewish people, but they brought that to the Gentiles. Stay away from food offered to idols. Something time and time again we hear in the church, it's okay to eat food offered to idols. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about all those things. Well, if you're really want to be part of Revelation, you should be very worried about it. And sexual sin could also be a part of purity, right? It's not just moral purity, but ritual purity as well. The two go hand in hand. So I want to go back to Revelation 14:12. So here's the wrapping up. So if at the end times it took faithful men to rededicate the temple in unity, faithfully to God, to set the altar right, and to merit the miracle of having the oil because of their great unity, how much more so for us? But this is what Revelation 14:12 tells us. And this is talking about now if we want to be part of that fighting force, if we want to be the Maccabees in our day and age, part of the 144,000, this is what we need to do. Where are we? 12. This is when perseverance, patience, is needed on the part of God's people, those who observe his commands and exercise Yeshua's faithfulness. Yes.
That's the very same verse that Mark used. You know that,
Yeah.
don't you?
I'm not, really?
Yes.
Oh. So if we want to be like them, then we need two things. The Torah in its entirety. Doesn't matter if you're Jew or Gentile, just dive in. Second thing is the faithfulness, the consistent faithfulness to do the Torah in its proper way that Yeshua had, not as it's translated from the Greek to the English, faith in Yeshua. Satan has faith that Yeshua, he believes that he is his adversary, that he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Faith doesn't mean anything. Faith is not an illumination. Your actions are the illumination that causes people to say how great God is. Look, there is God. He's illuminated before us in this community. So if we want to avoid the beast and the punishment that goes with the beast, then we as a community need to be holy and unified. It's the only rebellion that will allow us to fight against the beast of the end times. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
No
Don't run away yet. You've probably got plenty of questions.
Any questions?
Questions, comments? Very challenging, Marie says. I wonder if there was a theme in today's teachings across the Torah study and what Ryan's just shared, and even the prayer we had this morning about wholeness, mending our souls, Hashem mending our souls. You know, how we rub against one another and we inflict damage on one another. Patience, perseverance is a theme that's coming through. Thoughts?
Comments?
Do you want to be part of the end time army? Do you want to be part of the 144,000 JWs? Just kidding. Okay, I'll take that offline. Marie.
Sorry, I was half listening.
That's okay.
But,
you were playing with Lego, I saw.
But I think our identity is so important in this end times. Yeah. And to form an identity comes with a cost of a lifestyle, choices, coming together, community, standing with one another. And obviously we're not going to be Maccabees, and yet we are, because our lifestyle of purity, as you said, that's our weapon. We're not going to be Maccabee the hammer and literally kill people. But definitely our lifestyle and what we represent in unity of community, that's what's going to define us. So
absolutely,
that's part of an entire army as far as I'm concerned.
It's our shield and our sword and our shield. It's our defense and attack. The fish has a question. Judith has a question at the back. I always call her by her nickname.
We'll cut that out of the video.
It's so interesting how Revelation or how the translation in English changes everything.
Oh, yeah.
For example, like that one, this verse that's on the screen right now. I've looked up the different version and it says the faith in, and then in a little bubble, when you click on it, it says the faith of.
Yeah.
So it's like, we know what it's supposed to mean, but we're going to put it in a comment bubble. So if you click on it, you'll get it. If you don't click on it, you won't get it.
Depends how good your translator of your version is.
Yes. And then the second thing as well is I realized I was reading commentaries, Christian commentaries on Revelation and the verses. The part about the menorah is such a small part because it doesn't make any sense to anybody, because the lampstand, the fact that it's been translated as a lampstand or sometimes as a candle holder or a candlestick, it just makes it, you in your mind, you have the image of, the old school candle holders that you light up on your bedside table because before electricity. That's what people are thinking about when they're thinking about this verse. They don't actually relate that to the menorah whatsoever, but that's right. But then
bias for sure.
To think about how end time-esque the Hanukkah is, and the reason why we have to celebrate Hanukkah in our time, because even though it's a minor festival and it's not, it is a minor festival, it's so messianic in its way,
Absolutely.
and in every way, and it's so about end times. Just realizing this now, don't know why. It's been 5 years. But so it makes me so excited about doing Hanukkah, talking about Hanukkah, and shedding light, literally, on what Hanukkah means, what the rededication means, not of just the temple, but of us, using patience and the 3 Ps all in, with that, and how we can repurify ourselves, our menorah, and our lives so that we can shine bright like a diamond.
So I think Phil had a question, but Dave and Lisa had their hand up as well. I think they might be first. No, you hold the microphone. You're next. Go ahead, guys.
Hey, Ryan. Nice job bringing that all together. Good background research there. I love that last slide that you have there. I actually have that scripture verse highlighted also in my app on my phone, and that I love what you've highlighted there, because like in Hebrew, like the whole thing that we've been talking about, it says it actually refers to savlanut, which is patience. That perseverance is patience, and with what Mark was saying today was that sometimes it's not just we're going to do these things tomorrow. It's a long period of time. That, and there's a really good point there that it takes time for these things, and we want it all to happen tomorrow, some of these things, not necessarily to, die for these things, but some of us may need to, and to have that attitude, that warlike attitude, like it says there in Hebrew, Hashomrim et mitzvot Elohim, like you said, so it says there, like Shomer, Shomrim, guard, we need to guard like soldiers, the mitzvot, Shel Elohim, so we need to guard the mitzvot of Elohim like soldiers. And like you've said there very well, is to have the faithfulness of Yeshua, not faith in Yeshua. So there's a lot of teaching just in that element there that you've highlighted that we probably won't go into now, but it's really good. And I think what we're all talking about today is really encouraging, and that we need to have savlanut, we need to have patience and perseverance, and we need to shomer the mitzvot, we need to guard the mitzvot. So thanks, Ryan, good job.
Thank you. I like that. Being a little bit, not aggressive, but militant, disciplined, that we are guarding something of importance. That's a good note, David. That's very relevant. Yes, Phil, I think you're next.
Sure. Just coming to the question, faith in Yeshua versus faith of Yeshua, and it's a great pickup. And we all know many Christians, Australian Christians that go to Sunday congregations, and they're basically happy with their faith in Yeshua.
Yes.
Just as a discussion question, and so how would you try and explain to them that they shouldn't be so happy?
That is a great question. I would overarchingly say it's by being a light to them. By shining our light, they'll see that they're in darkness. They can see our light and they'll be like, oh man, quite dark where I am all of a sudden. But I think a way of informing them of that is that if and this is, I guess, going with my personal testimony, if you want to be a disciple of Yeshua, where does he say, have faith in me? He says, keep my faith. Just like David said, guard it. It's like if I gave you a book of my personal memoirs and I said, guard this and be faithful to do what I tell you. You know what I mean? That's why I would be encouraging them and say, you have faith that God is real. That's great. It's not, I'm not poo-pooing that and saying that, but it's just not enough. It doesn't encompass the meaning of the Hebrew word emet. That's the problem. It's like halfway. It's like the word has, this is the problem. When you translate Hebrew to English, you have to select out of 50, sometimes 4 or 5, and go, which one best suits the context for the vernacular of this language and the way these people think? And we've just gone, faith means to believe God will do something. But if you think of it covenantally as a Semitic person or a Jew would, you'd say it means that I am faithful and God is faithful, like a covenant, you know? And I'd then encourage them, if you're in covenant, where is your faithfulness? Where is, like, again, I use the being married, but everyone can understand this in relationships. If I have a friend and I don't ever visit my friend and they're always coming to me, we're gonna have a really rubbish relationship. Encourage them, if you want a relationship with God, you've got to do something for God. And it's your time, it's your purity, it's all of the above. It's getting up to pray. It's not about you, it's about God. That's the hardest thing about being in a relationship, particularly one that's quite intimate, is you have to not worry about what you need, but respond to what you said you would, or what needs you said you would fulfill of someone else. And I think that's where I had lost it in Christianity, was that, God, you're not fulfilling my needs. And God's like, well, so much for covenant, you know, where are you, you know? Yeah. But that's a good question. Thank you, Phil. Very good.
Oh,
yes, please hold.
hold that. It was just following up what you said.
Go ahead.
Hi, Ryan. I just want to say thank you very much for the teaching and putting it all together with menorah. I just want to clarify for my own brain, with regards to the Maccabees. So who did they actually overthrow? And is Hanukkah celebrating what they did?
Oh, good question. So they overthrew the Greek military forces under the Roman Emperor Antiochus. Greek forces. So they took back the temple because his army had come in, literally killed all the priests, and a few managed to escape, but they killed a lot of the people serving the temple, set up an image. They physically came, they used guerrilla warfare tactics, took it back, killed those guys, threw down the image, rebuilt the altar, cleansed the altar from the blood of the pigs they'd slaughtered there, and then rededicated it to God, which is why it's called Chanukah, which means rededication in Hebrew. And it's actually a twofold celebration. The first miracle is that these people dedicated to God were allowed to have victory over the beast. As we saw, those who are faithful will overcome. You could say they were the 144,000 of their time. I'd be interested to see how many Maccabees there actually were, but not that it matters. But you could say metaphorically they were. And the second miracle is because of their holiness in their lives, they were not only able to overcome with God's help the enemy, there was enough oil to meet the physical service of the inner light they had, if that makes sense. The second one was that the oil lasted 8 nights. Just like their community was faithful to produce the good works needed to actually run the temple, God provided oil so they could physically do the service.
Yeah, so just to add to that, Brian, there was only one night of oil left, and remember how Ryan was talking about going out there, the people had to get the olive, crush the grapes, crush the olives, produce the oil, and it had to go through a process which took 8 days. They'd run out of fresh oil, so there was only 1 day worth of oil left, so they had to go through that whole process before they could get fresh oil. And so the oil that was put in there lasted 8 days, and that's what we celebrate. That's why each night we put another candle on each night, an extra candle for the whole 8 nights. So yeah.
Yeah, so I hope that explains it. So it's 2 miracles. So that's a great question.
And I just wanted to say, the Lord must be moving for us, because did you notice our olive trees? they're from Israel.
Are you producing a lot of fruit, are you?
No, well, we just thought we're on the same level.
Nice work, nice work. I expect oil next week.
Oh, mine was just going on from what Phil was saying. I just wanted to add, because in our Christian or in Christian circles, you know, we just see faith as faith and not works. And that's what James was addressing, that Emunah is works. You have to have works to show your faith.
Yep.
And then I also read that or heard a teaching about that Emunah is about seeking God through, you know, knowledge as well. So that's why the Jews are encouraged to study Torah.
Yes.
Because that grows your Emunah as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think David and Lisa, again.
Hey, Ryan. I just wanted to, I guess, you meant the menorah is great. Obviously, the connection there, and I guess probably for anyone that maybe hasn't done Hanukkah before, obviously Hanukkah is very different from a menorah, and the menorah is only used in the temple, and it's never lit. It's only used for temple purposes. So very big difference there in what we're doing. But I think the whole faithfulness element is amazing during Hanukkah because, you know, we read, I'd encourage everyone to read the story of the Maccabees and the stories that happened and the faith that some of those people did where, you know, there's a sad or very moving story about the mother watching her sons being boiled alive, you know, and they did that for Hashem. And we can all, I guess, you know, want to have that, you know, to stand that test, to be able to stand that sort of thing is the perseverance or patience that, you know, the perseverance and strength that we need when things do get challenging.
Absolutely. That was another level when it comes to sucking it up and, you know, being like a cup of concrete. They just did it because they knew the consequences of being unfaithful. So, you know, they're very sad, but very sobering and very also encouraging, like you said, stories of what faithfulness looks like a little bit outside the Bible, but by the people who own the Bible, like the Jewish people in history. Yeah, they're really great stories. And just quickly, that's this for those online. This is a really great way to unpack that. And you'll see where I got a lot of that teaching from was from First Fruits there. So, yeah.
So, yeah, I was going to say that with regards to the sacrifice they went through, there's that recognition that we sometimes forget that this life is only a part of the bigger life. And while it's not good to end this life now, because this is the only opportunity we have to do the mitzvah, the mitzvot, there is another life after this that Hashem has for us. And it's not, you know, some Hollywood sort of stuff. You know that what I'm talking about. So they looked into the eternal when they allowed these sufferings to happen, rather than giving up the eternal for some short-term pleasure or some short-term relief of the pain or the suffering. They looked at the eternal and were able to go through that, just as Yeshua did. You know, he saw the end goal and was able to go through the things that he had to go through to see the end goal, not just for him, but for all of us. And it's the same for us when we go through it. It's not just for our own thing that we go to the end goal for, but it's for those around us. When those around us see that we stand up for Hashem, regardless of the circumstance, then it encourages them. It gives them eternal hope as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's so much in all of this. So thanks, Ryan. You've really opened up a good can of worms, pulled a few out, but there's so much more we could talk about.
A good way to sum that up actually is my good friend who I had coffee with this week, he has a saying, I don't know where he got it from, but he was telling me that we look at persecution and we forget that it only lasts as long as we're alive. Our life is actually relatively short. All you have to do is put up with it while you're alive, and then you have eternity in its reward. So that was encouraging. That made me think of the Maccabees between what you and David were saying. Yes, go ahead.